if you cannot handle it, please click off now. Before we get into this case, please, please, please do not forget to hit the subscribe, the like, and also leave me a comment if you want. No pressure. So I have me a drink. It says Mom Fuel, and I got these. I have another glass, and sorry guys. So I have another glass as well, and a ring corkscrew that I got from Sally's Beauty. So they had a special. If you spend over $39, you get 2 wine glasses and a cute corkscrew. So cheers to that. Okay, so let's get some lotion. Champagne toast that my dog decided to taste. Okay, so for those that cannot stay to listen to this video, you have 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I am now beginning this true crime case of Robert Berdella, which he was also known as the Kansas City Butcher and the Collector. So from this point on, I will refer to him as Robert. So Robert was born on January 31st of 1949 in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. And he was convicted of murdering at least 6 men between 1984 and 1987 in Kansas City, Missouri. So Robert was the first and the oldest of sons born to Robert Sr. and Mary Berdella. Mary, at the time of Robert Jr.'s birth, she was a homemaker, and Robert Sr. was a die setter for the Ford Motor Company. So for those who does not know what a die setter is, like myself, it is basically a special machine tool that is used to manufacture industries. So they basically this machine cuts and forms a desired shape or profile for the manufacturer companies. So Robert was born in a Catholic home, and they were of Italian descent. His family raised him as a die-hard Catholic. Their household was very religious, and the family regularly attended Mass together. And both sons were required to attend religious education courses as well. So as a child, Robert was described as very intelligent, but he was a loner, and because he was a loner, he rarely went outside, and he seldomly had any friends. to himself. So Robert was not athletic, whereas his younger brother Daniel, which was 7 years younger than Robert, he was very athletic. So Robert Sr. Put so much energy into Daniel being athletic and having like this physical education that he downplayed Robert Jr. and he sometimes like compared the both of them, making Robert Sr. Robert Jr. feel so small because he's comparing the two sons, and he felt like that having a lack of physical education and not attending any like sport things was unfavorable. So occasionally Robert Sr. had physically and emotionally abused both children, and he beat them seldom with a leather strap, or as what we would say a belt. So even though Robert Jr. did not perform at a great level in physical education, he did, however, perform very well academically. Although his teachers had said that he was very difficult to teach because of the fact of him being bullied by other students. So he stayed to himself. He did not socialize with peers, and he really wasn't focused on learning. Again, not saying that he did not understand what was being taught, but because of him being bullied, it had his mind somewhere else. When Robert reached puberty, he had discovered that he was homosexual. And initially, he kept that secret to himself, and he did not tell anyone for several years. As he got older, in his early teens, he had a girlfriend for a brief moment. By that same teenage year, Robert had begun to basically gain his self-confidence, but with that self-confidence, he had manifested an attitude towards individuals that they explained was somewhat rude and condescending, and this attitude was particularly against women. During that same year, Robert had learned about cooking and art, and he had developed showmanship. So on Christmas Day of 1965, the Bradella family had drove to Canton, Ohio to visit some relatives for Christmas. That same evening, Robert Sr. had a heart attack, and he was 39 at that time. 2 days later, Robert had returned to Cuyahoga Falls by himself, and when he arrived home, his family had told him that his father had died. So again, Robert was away visiting family. So when he came back home, that's when his family had broke the news that his dad had died. Robert had basically wrapped himself around religion during that time as a sense of trying to cope with his father's death. And then he had later started to begin looking up and researching different religions. trying to learn about their faiths. Out of all of the religions, after he had became cynical about all religions. So in 1965, Robert had saw a film called The Collector. So The Collector was initially started off as a book, and then they made a film. So this movie basically involved a man who had stalked and abducted a young woman that he found attractive, and he held her captive in his windowless stone basement. And the movie describes that this guy had viewed her as nothing more attractive than specimen. So after several weeks of this guy capturing the woman, she died because she had contracted an illness, and the captor did not keep her alive. So with this movie, Robert was very open to saying that this movie had a lasting impression on him. Shortly after Robert Sr. passed, Mary, which is Robert Jr.'s mother, had remarried. So Robert Jr. was definitely not, he did not like the fact that his mom remarried, and so he had some sort of resentment towards her because he felt like his mother had betrayed the father by remarrying so soon. So that's when Robert began being withdrawn from the family, and he wrapped himself around like activities that he would do when he was a child, such as painting and collecting coins and writing to foreign pen pals. So with him writing to different pen pals, Robert had gained some sort of I would say like fantasy as far as him like collecting different things and learning about different cultures of all over the world. So this had became a hobby for Robert. So Robert began writing to pen pals in countries such as Vietnam and Burma. And in return for him being their pen pal, they would send him stamps for his collection and photographs of mythical and historical icons, ancient cultures, and architects. So from 1965, he began avidly collecting these artifacts, and this had inspired him to open up his own business in 1982. So in the summer of 1967, Robert had graduated from Cuyahoga Falls High School. Throughout his high school years, he had earned excellent grades and had displayed a lot of potential that one teacher had placed him in an independent study program. Shortly after graduating, Robert had relocated to Kansas City, and there he had enrolled in Kansas City Art Institute with aspirations of becoming a college professor. During his first year at Kansas City Art Institute, Robert was considered an attentive and talented student. Although by his second year in that school, Robert had become vocally authoritarian. He had also become acquainted with a clique of students who had supplied him drugs, which then he in return sold to other students as a profit. So because he then was selling these drugs to other people, he had a reputation around the school of him being a minor drug dealer. So in addition to him supplying drugs around the school, he had began abusing alcohol, and he had also engaged in acts of animal torture on at least 3 occasions. So during 2 of these instances, Robert had tortured a duck and a chicken in the presence of his peers. And in the 3rd instance, he had experimented with sedatives and tranquilizers on a dog. So at the age of 19, Robert was arrested for attempting to sell meth to an undercover officer, and he was released after posting a $3,000 bond, which is equivalent to $22,000 in 2020. So he had pled guilty to this offense and was handed a 5-year suspended sentence. So in 1969, Robert had voluntarily dropped out of the Art Institute after receiving a lot of criticism from the college administrators for killing then cooking a duck for the sake of art. So he had chose to stay in the Kansas City area, and during that time he had moved in the Hyde Park district. By this time, Robert had began openly expressing that he was gay, and he had been for several years. So he had began spending much of his time with male prostitutes, drug addicts, petty criminals, and runaways. So with these individuals, he wanted to befriend them so that he can help free them from their drug addiction and their criminal lifestyles. It was later stated by Robert that during the 1970s that he was around these individuals, he had no physical contact with them whatsoever. So several of Robert's family members had stated that Robert expressed a lot that he felt like he was a foster parent to most of these youth. So by the early 1980s, all of these people that Robert had became acquainted with had stopped contacting him, and he was like feeling frustrated at these individuals because he felt like they didn't appreciate his assistance with trying to steer them away from their lifestyles. So claims were reported later on to investigators that during this time, Robert was engaging in sexual activities with these individuals, and that he was basically in control over them. So he had bribed these individuals by asking them for sex in return So shortly after, Robert had moved into a Charlotte Street address, and he had got a job as a short order cook in several restaurants around Kansas City, in part to help pay lawyer fees and fines accrued from the drug arrest that he had got at the age of 19. As another source of income, he had sold items of art and antiques that he had accrued from collecting them. By contacts he had established in Africa, Asia, South America, and various Pacific Rim countries. He had initially operated his side business from his home. But then in 1982, Robert had began renting his own booth at a Westport flea market. He had named this booth Pop's Bazaar, and he primarily sold primitive art, jewelry, and antiques, although occasionally he made a generous monthly profit. The income that he had profited through this business was not sufficient enough to maintain his daily expenses and to make ends meet. So as a result of that, Robert occasionally had to either sell goods to fellow merchants at a financial loss or steal items to sell at his booth. Additionally, he also would take lodgers in at his home as another source of income. So at this flea market, Robert had became acquainted with a fellow merchant named Paul Howell, who had operated a booth adjacent to his own. So soon after this friendship began, Robert was acquainted with Paul Howell's younger son named Jerry. So Jerry and his friends initially used to taunt Robert over his homosexuality. Although, according to Robert, Jerry later confided in him that he and his friends occasionally earned money as the male prostitutes. So, to break that down some, Jerry and his friends would make fun of Robert because him being gay, and then later one-on-one Jerry came to him and told him that basically he understood because Jerry himself and his friends would sell themselves as male prostitutes to earn money. So by the early 1980s, Paul had relocated his business from the Westport Flea Market to a store that was located at the intersection of 39th and Main Street. Paul's family also moved into an apartment above the shop, and his younger son had occasionally engaged in heated arguments with Robert, but that did not stop Robert and Paul's friendship. Robert had offered his legal or financial assistance to Jerry in the event that Jerry had ran into the law. So by the summer of 1984, Jerry had turned 19. So to get into the murders, it was believed that Robert had killed Jerry on July 5th of 1984. And it was stated that he abducted Jerry on the promise of driving him to attend a dancing contest in Miriam. According to Robert, he plied Jerry with alcohol, volume, and acepromazine, until Jerry became unconscious, and then he injected him with a heavy tranquilizer before binding Jerry to the bed. Jerry was restrained to Robert's bed for a period of approximately 28 hours. And throughout this period of captivity, Robert had repeatedly drugged, tortured, raped, and violated him with foreign objects. He also stated that Jerry had questioned him as to why he was being treated like this, and Robert repeatedly ignored him. So according to Robert, Jerry had either choked on his own vomit, or it was the combination of the gag and the medicines that were too strong for him that killed him. Robert later stated that he briefly attempted to perform resuscitation to Jerry after he died, before he dragged his body to the basement. He then put Jerry's body above a large cooking pot and made several incisions through the used inner elbows and jugular vein before leaving the body in this position overnight to allow the blood to drain from his corpse. The following day, he dismembered Jerry's body using a chainsaw and boning knives before wrapping the sections in newspaper and trash bags. These bags were later placed inside larger trash bags, which Robert had placed outside for a garbage crew to collect and take to a landfill. So, Robert was later questioned by officers that were investigating Jerry's disappearance, and Robert had claimed that he had drove Jerry to Miriam, and that the two had parted company close to Jerry's intended destination. And Robert later claimed that he did not see him since. However, Robert had kept a detailed log in which he documented each act of sexual and physical torture inflicted upon his victims. So, on April 10th of 1985, a former lodger of Berdella's 20-year-old Robert Sheldon had arrived at his door asking if he could stay again at his house for a short period of time. And according to Robert, Sheldon was responsible in paying rent. So he chose to drug and hold him captive on April 12th when he returned home from work to find Sheldon intoxicated in his home. Robert was adamant that he had no firm malice towards Sheldon, but he saw him as an individual who he could express some of the anger and frustration that he had towards other people. Sheldon was also drugged with sedatives and held captive in the second floor bedroom for 3 days, in which he endured torture, as the swabbing of drain cleaner in his left eye, the insertion of needles beneath his fingertips, the binding of his wrists with piano wire with the intention of permanently damaging the nerves in his hands, and filling his ears with caulking to reduce his hearing capacity. 3 days after Robert had begun holding Sheldon captive on April 15th, a workman had came to Robert's home to perform some scheduled work on the roof, which had led to Robert fatally suffocating Sheldon by placing a sack over shelter from a severe thunderstorm. Robert had invited him inside his house, and noting that Mark's acute state of tenseness and depression, he had volunteered to inject him with chlorpromazine with the explanation that this would calm down and relax him. Mark had willingly accepted the offer, and 30 minutes later, Robert decided to render him captive. Mark was then carried to the second floor bedroom, where he endured almost a day of captivity and torture, including the application of alligator clips to his nipples to facilitate electrical shocks to his body, at which the point Mark began regressing into a state of unconsciousness. According to Robert, 1 hour after his experimenting with hypodermic needles by inserting them into various muscles upon his victim's back, Mark died through a combination of the drugs, the gag, and the lack of oxygen. And he noted in his log that Mark died on June 23rd at 7 p.m. So after Mark's death, there was an increase in brutality. And I'm not going to go into each victim's case, but there was an increase in the brutality, which led to 4 more victims, which Robert had basically just abused. So as far as his arrest, there was a search warrant that was put out because one of Robert's victims had escaped, and so that led the police to put a search warrant out. The search warrant followed after Robert had declined to allow the officers inside his house. So once they got the search warrant, they uncovered a human skull inside a closet on the second floor of his property and a partially decomposed human head in the backyard. They also uncovered several human vertebrae scarred by both hacksaw and knife marks stowed in the hallway, and several human teeth stowed in 2 envelopes. And both a hacksaw and miter saw were discovered in the basement of the property, and a chainsaw was also found to be soiled with bloodstains, flesh, and pubic hairs. Luminol tests revealed that the floor of Bardella's basement and 2 plastic trash barrels were extensively bloodstained. 334 Polaroid pictures and 34 snapshot prints of various male individuals were also found stored in various locations within Robert's house. These pictures showed Christopher Bryson, which was the victim who escaped, and several other men, both in life and in death, and many of the images had been taken as the subjects had been tortured. So let's just say there was a lot of evidence inside Robert's house. So there's a lot of information about the victims and their families that have put missing person reports 22nd of 1988, a grand jury formally indicted Robert for the murder of Larry Wayne Pearson. The following month, he was arraigned and pleaded guilty in the Fourth Circuit of the Jackson County Court before the judge to first-degree murder of Larry Pearson. Following the acceptance of the plea, the judge had insisted that Robert confess under oath as to Pearson's death. In response to questioning by his attorney, Robert stated, "I put a plastic bag over his head and tied it with rope and allowed him to suffocate." When they asked did he deliberately perform this act with malice, Robert simply stated yes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, and upon being sentenced, Robert was transferred to the Missouri State Penitentiary to commence his life sentence. He was temporarily placed in protective custody due to the concerns for his safety. So then a second plea was submitted in court for the forcible sodomy against Christopher Bryson. So Robert had asked for a plea bargain to avoid the death penalty. So he had agreed to confess in graphic detail as to whom he had killed, what indignities he had subjected each victim to, and how he had killed each victim, and what he had done with their body. These confessions were given to prosecutors between December 13th and December 15th of 1988. In return for his cooperation, the prosecution agreed not to seek the death penalty. That's crazy. That is crazy. That's so crazy that these people can be out here just doing whatever, and because the state wants information, they can just say, "Oh, well, we'll just say you won't get the death penalty if you give us information." What the hell? This man done. That's crazy. So let's just say that he died in 1992 because he complained to the staff of heart pains, and he was taken to his cell to the prison infirmary. So the medical staff had determined that his heart was unstable and called an ambulance. When they took him to Columbia, Missouri, a hospital, he was pronounced dead from a heart attack at 3:55 p.m. and he was 43 years old. Good. So that is all, guys. If you want to look more into it, because that was a lot of information that I could not go over, but definitely check that case out. As I always say, my heart goes out to the victims' families. I could never imagine, but as all